Welcome to Schmidt List, a podcast on innovation, creativity, and entrepreneurship. Join host Kurt Schmidt, president of Foundry, as he and his guest share valuable insights and strategies. This is the perfect opportunity to explore fresh ideas to improve yourself and your business. Come join Kurt as he interviews this week's inspiring guest.
Hey everyone, before we jump into the show, I just wanted to share this important message with all of you. As an agency leader, it likely often crosses your mind. Out of the million things I could be doing, what should I be focused on right now? When you're busy putting out daily fires, you easily get sucked into the weeds. And when the work lightens up, you're scrambling to find the projects to keep your team billable. But why enter 2024 just hoping that you'll thrive? On November 8th, Parallax is hosting a webinar featuring founder and CEO Tom O'Neill. Having built and scaled The Nerdery, a digital software agency, to 500 employees and $85 million in revenue, Tom is sharing practical habits to give you the focus and confidence to crush it in the year to come. I've had the pleasure of working with Tom in the past, and with his extensive background in agency scaling, he possesses the unparalleled expertise and experience to teach and guide others. So I strongly suggest you don't miss this webinar. Learn more and sign up for the free webinar at getparallax.com or via the link below in the show notes. And now, back to the show. Sean, how are you today?
I'm doing well, Kurt. How are you doing? Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for being here. I'm doing great now that you're here. So tell me a little bit about the work you do, Sean, and who do you work with?
Yeah. So I founded a company called DemoHop, which is a way to really bring teams that are scattered about in different cities or locations to get them working together, to get them connecting, to get them networking, if you will. But, I think to kind of give some credence to how important this is, I grew up leading teams early in my career that were distributed way before the pandemic and had to learn some real tricks of the trade to create connection and collaboration when people weren't in the same office, the same time zone, sometimes even not the same continent. And I know I was doing this 15 years ago, and now it's kind of commonplace for people. But what we did is we productized some of those tricks of the trade, and we made them available to large distributed organizations to bring people together. And it's been working out really well. It's been fun to be an entrepreneur.
Well, it's a perfect timing. I mean, I'm imagining the pandemic was a big catalyst for this type of work, right?
Yeah, it was certainly an inspiration for the work. I was actually leading or directing the work for, over 1,000 people at United Health Group during the pandemic, and we were working on a response to the pandemic while I was there. And you could just see that teams were just spread out and more diffuse. And while we hadn't built the product yet, I certainly saw the need because of the pandemic that really leaders needed new tools, new ways of working to bring people together. And so while we didn't really benefit from it, we were certainly inspired by the conditions that the pandemic created.
Yeah, I was going to say the thing that makes me very interested in the product that you do is that I've constantly believed that the biggest issues we ever deal with is communications. Like there's no technical problems. There's no problems that just show up out of nowhere. They all stem from poor communication. Is that similar to your mindset?
Absolutely. And communication is hard. I mean, there's all sorts of things that show even this medium right now isn't communicating nearly as much as we intend to communicate with each other. And so we have to be very deliberate about it. What I've really felt is, I think as a leader of large teams, I don't think the leaders have nearly as many challenges communicating with the team than the team has in communicating up to the leaders. And that's hard to feel as a leader of a large organization. In some ways it's a lonely role, but trying to create that better two-way flow of communication is a real challenge, and it's where there's a space to do some new things.
Yeah, well, you've got some historical bad leadership that's out there that is. I remember when I was younger, a lot of people followed sort of the Jack Welch sort of playbook of, well, I have an open door. And like that was just like an invite or something. Like you just walk in and talk to the boss, when most of my time is spent trying to hide from the boss and stay under the radar. Because I don't want to get laid off. I don't want to stick my head up and get it cut off, right?
Especially with like the whole reputation.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So the whole idea of the open door policy sounded very great, but very little people utilized it. Do you find that in the type of work you're doing in solving those communication problems, how has leadership changed with this type of distributed work from when it was ridiculous if your butt wasn't in a seat at 8 o'clock, looking right at the boss, right?
Yeah, no, it's definitely changed. I think there's a couple of things to really consider. One is that, there's all this push or the in the news, playing on the news is this, hey, let's get back to the office, let's return to the office kind of push. And I think there's maybe a little bit of misunderstanding of what's driving some of that. I mean, certainly maybe, hey, it feels good to see people out there and then, track what they're doing perhaps. I think by and large, the challenge is this feeling, it's a sense that people and ideas aren't flowing across the enterprise the way they used to.
Yeah.
And when you ask about how has leadership changed, I know firsthand is as we move to distributed work, and again, teams were spread across all sorts of cities, is I felt this incredible burden as a leader to be the one to pick and choose ideas in left field and right field and bring teams together and make them happen. And by and large, I'm wrong more often than I'm right. But you could see that teams weren't connecting organically on their own, doing what you espouse so much about making those connections happen. It's become a very friction and slow process for doing that. And we created DemoHop to overcome some of those things. But I think a big part of why leaders are pushing for this get back in the office is because of that. It's just this sense that hey, I got to be the one that has to connect all the dots. And I think shrewd leaders know that they're not really good at doing that. And so you want to have that happen more organically across the enterprise.
Right. Well, I think that's one of the key things that a lot of people learned during the pandemic. And, I said one of the key learnings from the pandemic is that bad leadership didn't have a place to hide anymore. Because if you weren't empathetic and if you weren't in touch with your team, it became really apparent very quickly, didn't it?
It did, undoubtedly. And I think it was easy to, hide out. I mean, again, speaking as a leader, it's very easy to say, okay, we're just going to regress into sending emails and my team events are going to be me talking for 45 minutes and felt good to me. Everyone understood what I said. I think they have direction now, right? But no, it doesn't work. We need better ways there are new tools that all leaders need to be learning. And I think there's a new cohort of businesses and leaders that are learning those tools and figuring out how to lead in this whole new way.
Yeah. Well, let's talk to, let's imagine one of the audience members is interested in growing in this communication, being able to communicate up, down, and across.
Yeah.
And all these things. And one of the things that I've always proposed is, you've got to be good at internal networking, right? Do you have any tips for in the distributed space? How can you best network? Because typically when people think of networking, they think of like water cooler or going to lunch together and things like that. But if we're unable to do that, Sean, like what are some of the other options that I might have in front of me that I'm not thinking of?
Yeah, so that's where we're trying to fill that space. And I was really inspired by Satya Nadella at Microsoft, who got some data on their own internal networking at their company. And within these large distributed enterprises, it's useful to have a mental model of how networking happens. And there are two critical types of relationships that we all have at work and our personal lives. One of them are called our bonding relationships, which are our everyday teams that we're working with. And they're the people that on Friday, you kind of know what they're going to do this weekend. And on Monday, Tuesday, you're going to ask them about it. And you've got that type of connection with them. And those people you also have, you're on the team. And so you have official and unofficial ways of making decisions and getting work done. And all the research has shown is that those bonding connections, those formal relationships have been sustained in distributed work. The challenge, however, is this other kind of essential relationships that we have, which are called bridging relationships. And those bridging relationships are totally informal. They're the connections we have beyond our everyday. that are in other parts of the company. And those are the people who give us, expose us to new ideas. They give us exposure to expertise. They actually inspire us, and they're a huge part of happiness at work. And so when Satya and Nadella saw the analysis of Microsoft through the pandemic, they showed that bonding maintained, but bridging was decimated and just was not happening at all. And people weren't forming that. And so to your question about how do you do that, I really believe that, and Satya Nadella said it himself, is that the challenge of leadership in the post-pandemic era is how do you create deliberate mechanisms as a leader to cultivate those connections? And so that's really one of the challenges. Certainly we can say, hey, Kurt, it's your job. You need to go out there and build relationships. You figure it out. And you run a podcast and you're super extroverted and are a natural connector. Great, I'll go do it. But for a lot of people, that isn't their intuition. And so they need to have, if you think, kind of parties thrown that bring people together and allow people to connect and have the conditions that lead people to connect. And so with DemoHop, what we created was this whole science fair capability. And so it's an online science fair, no fancier than what you did in middle school, standing in front of your booths and presenting your stuff. But those science fairs are magical at creating circulation and small little conversations and go, oh, that's interesting. That's an interesting idea. And when I was at Target, we built out the science fair concept, and we called it our technology demo day, run every quarter, attended by thousands, still to this day, every quarter. And a huge part of the innovation that sparked led to the turnaround of that entire business and that entire technology organization all came out of these events that led to bridging connections. And so what we've done with DemoHop is we've transformed that into an online platform that any large organization can do to create and cultivate those bridging situations. And as a leader, you're kind of like, how do I throw a big party? Like maybe you're not a big party thrower, an event person, but we've created a turnkey way that allows kind of any leader to stand this up, and it's going to lead to connections. And the events are always what we call CEO worthy. They're always ready. If the CEO shows up, it's going to look great and be great for them, which is usually a concern for the leader. But their teams are going to love it. And that's one of the ways that we've created a deliberate mechanism to create bridging connections in large organizations.
Yeah, it makes sense, because the thing you really want is to make it accessible, right? Is that it doesn't feel like I have to, virtually put on my suit and tie and show up in whichever, like it can be a very casual experience, right? And
you don't want to contrive either.
Right, yes, it does. And one of the things that we've done at Foundry is we've led some hackathons internally at companies where you have multidisciplinary groups getting together to solve some problems. And then you have somebody maybe hopefully from the executive team that's like handing out the awards. And just to your point, also leaders are invited to join to see what are people working on and how are they doing it. But again, to what I think is key, and one of the things I learned very early on in my career is learning how to build empathy with those departments that are foreign to me, right? Like sales and marketing and QA and all these things that seemed like they were there to make my job more difficult. But if I learned about what their goals were and how they worked and what their challenges were, I found myself partnering better with those organizations. And to your point, that can be a key unlock for a company to sort of disrupt itself and become more innovative.
Yeah. Well, and you're totally right. It's so that exposure to other expertise. If you think of people early in their career, I mean, all these ideas and concepts are just like foreign. Like, what are tax accountants have to do with technology? Well, the R&D tax credit's a pretty big deal, and there's a reason we're asking all these questions. Well, it takes years for people to figure that out, but if you have the conditions where you can meet some people and you can say, why are you asking that question? You can start building some of that understanding that gives people, and I think this is what the best leaders do, is they give people context for the business and why things are. They don't necessarily explain it or tell you why, but they provide that context. And a lot of that context is really difficult to do now. I think in smaller companies, it's not nearly as difficult, but in when you're getting the hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of people, it's really easy, even if you're going in the office a couple of days a week, to not find those connections that really start educating you on the company and what it's like to work in a business.
Yeah, and it's very easy for work to get doubled up inside of an organization because of that. I mean, how many times have you been in meetings where you're like, wait a second, we're doing a project just like that?
Yes. No, and that's oddly enough, that's one of the features we have in DemoHop. Lends itself to identifying duplicative work. And often after an event, we'll hear from the people who, these events are usually hundreds or thousands of people come on the platform all at once. And there's a host that runs it, and we make it really easy for them. But a comment that they often share with us afterwards is, so many people said, we're doing this 2, 3, 4 times, or everyone's trying to solve the same problem, and we had no idea. And I'm like, yes, that's exactly what we're trying to do, is just let's be more visible, let's transparent, and let's share what's going on in a way that's really approachable for everybody. And that's what's key. Is if you're sitting in an office in Berlin or Bangalore or Boston, it's very difficult to understand what's happening in those other locations, and there need to be mechanisms for doing that.
Yeah, I find that that's one of the things where, these leaders in these organizations, they want some transparency into what's happening. But I mean, I've experienced it before in large organizations where you're trying to solve this problem, but you don't even know, like, this department over here solved it 2 years ago, not in a way that necessarily works for you, but they've already done a lot of the legwork. Yeah. But you have no exposure to it. And I've seen people where, and I get it, like, well, I can blame the organization for not creating those pathways, but to me, I don't know, maybe a bit more industrious, where I was like, well, if I don't see the pathways, I'll just make them myself. Right. But, when you're working with leaders who are interested in a product like this, what are some of the key challenges that you see them facing right now? Yeah.
So, actually, the example you just gave, just to share an interesting anecdote that was so memorable for me, is, so I led the digital teams at Target. So all the Target online, e-commerce, those types of things. And I mentioned earlier, we had Demo Day that we ran there that was very popular, is impactful. And for me, one of the most memorable moments I remember was attending a science fair. Again, picture cardboard tables and people walking around and mulling about, and observing an engineer or a product person on the supply chain team talking to a marketing leader. And the supply chain person, the marketing leader, was presenting something about their ad campaigns or something like that. And this engineer on the supply chain team, who has nothing to do, think of thousands of people, these people would never interact, would look and saw and said, how did you get those photos? And the market person's like, oh, we did this project a couple of years ago. We got all the photos and stuff. And he's like, we need those photos to put them on the shelves so people know what they're packing for this. I think it was like beauty products or something or other. And it was like, it would never have come up in any other condition that these two people would have connected. But it was just having, again, that occasion to bring people together, lots of sharing, lots of openness. You're not just in a giant Zoom meeting where you're that picture in the bottom left corner and there's a million other people that you would never ask that question. And so it was the power of that type of moment that I knew that you just know is missing. You could just feel is missing in large enterprises. So I forget the original.
That type of moment can save thousands and millions of dollars in some businesses, right?
Yeah. Well, and in fact, it was the problem was such a big problem, but they thought the solve was so expensive. They kept telling the business teams, we can't do it. We just can't prioritize it now. And then this guy walks out. He's like, I think we got the data we have. I think we can launch it in a week or something, right? And it was just such a game changer. Just that exposure to information, because our bonding connections, interestingly, are echo chambers. I think we all know that. We set up norms, we have relationship styles, and unfortunately, or for better or worse, in our bonding relationships, we can't be as honest with people as we are in our bridging relationships, where there's less at stake in the relationship. And that's why some really creative ideas or some out of the box thinking comes from having that conversation in the hallway or that person on the plane right next to you that you kind of confess your life to and know you're never going to see again. There's this trust that's possible with bridging that's not with bonding. And people are really missing it right now. Employees everywhere are kind of missing that. And I think leaders feel it and they just can't find the words for it.
Well, that goes back to my original question before I got off subject there, which is what challenges are they? Is it sort of this get back to work in the office challenge? Like, what are leaders that you're talking to these days? Is it any different now than it was pandemic or pre-pandemic? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I think that the big change that leaders are realizing is during the pandemic, we discovered some new flexibility that we never realized we had before, which was the composition of teams could be different. So if you think about a team of 5 or 10 people, it used to be that by and large, most of those people were located in the same city or location. So for instance, at Target, we had our search engine marketing team primarily based in Sunnyvale, California. And that team was based there and the talent was there. And there may have been other people in other cities contributing as well, but that was the hub. And what happened during the pandemic is we changed the composition of teams and we realized, I can pull talent from anywhere now and grab that person in Atlanta or someone else in another city and start inserting them. And so we shuffled the deck of employees really, really well so that they're no longer aligned by cities anymore. And so that shuffling has been so profound that there's no way we're going to resort and reorder all that. And I think what leaders are feeling, to your question, is the dawning realization is like, we love that flexibility, but it's changed things for employees when they go in the office. Like, let's get back to the office. We're going to have serendipity. But now, we all know this, that our teams are now in other cities and we end up being on a call all the time, even though you're in the office. And I think that's kind of what the dilemma is like we know being together in person is better. And even for those who maybe it's a little intimidating, like there is still good moment. It creates great moments. But I think leaders can see that there's no way we're going to put the toothpaste back in the toothpaste tube here. That people have spread so much, and we've benefited from this new equations that it's a real struggle to lead through that.
Yeah, it makes sense. The idea of leaders struggling with this sort of trying to be flexible, but still balancing, like, things have to get done. And I think there's a new generation of leaders that are okay with being more vulnerable, being more empathetic, and being able to express themselves in a much clearer with a higher EQ. I think I'm seeing it more and more in leaders that are growing. So I think that, again, the idea of working in a distributed team where it's not only they're in different locations, they're in different time zones.
Yep.
So your meetings are all over the place. It's hard to stay. It's a real, you've really got to change how you work a lot, and you got to be intentional about it. And I think that's what I kind of hear you saying over and over again, is how much more important it is to not just sort of rely on the machine to tell you what to do, but how much more intentional you need to be.
Completely. And I think that what you've observed of this empathy has been a trend for a while now, where leaders are becoming more empathetic. And I think it's just the nature of work has changed that requires that. I think people realize that diverse skills are really valuable, which means I used to lead this strict function, and everyone was an expert in marketing or brand marketing or analytics, and I ran that function, and we threw things over the fence to each other, and so I didn't need to really know what's going on there. And everyone here is my same Myers-Briggs, and we can all behave the same way. Now, I'm exaggerating there, but that the combination of teams now and the diversity that we try to bring with teams has forced the leaders that have bubbled up have been much more empathetic. But, to your point is there's a new skill that they need to have around this deliberate ability to bring connection in the enterprise and across their people. And it's not easy to do, and not all the tools are there to do that. it makes me think of, there's all this run towards AI right now and all this automation about what AI can do. And a little bit of my personality is to go the opposite. Is when everyone goes left, I'm like, wait, should we go right or think about it? And so as we've created DemoHop, I mean, we're all about people and connection. We're not about AI and computers and bots and automation. As much as I'm a techie and I enjoy that stuff, I feel like the world has overcorrected or is kind of too excited. It's in a frenzy around some of these things, and we're going to come back, and those empathetic leaders are going to shine, and they're going to figure out how to really create connections and networking relationship across their teams, and those are the ones that are going to thrive and get the best business results.
Yeah, because you can't change human nature in a couple of years just because of a pandemic. I mean, we're social creatures, right? We crave connection. We crave being around others. And so there is a learning curve there. And sometimes the learning is how to deal with maybe that initial anxiety that you might have and those types of things. But honestly, like, I agree with you completely, Sean, is that we tend to swing the pendulum pretty hard in one direction, but eventually it settles back, and then something else will happen and it'll swing again. And we just have to deal with that, right? And because, again, businesses are made of people, right? That's the thing that people keep forgetting when they're talking about businesses.
Absolutely.
Is that there is no business without the people. Like,
no doubt.
So if you're not focused on that, then there's not going to be a business, and you're going to have a lot of rogue agents inside your organization tearing it apart from the inside unless you've got strong leadership that's being intentional and bringing people together in a way where not only can they benefit from having a job there, but they can benefit from being a part of this organization, right? And I'm sure you felt that at a place like Target, where they do really want people to grow at Target as an employee, right?
No, that's completely true. And to pick up, the trends of connection that you're highlighting is, if you just look at society overall over the last decades, there's some great books, and I think one of my favorite ones is Bowling Alone by Robert Putnam, who wrote a book about, hey, how people used to gather on Tuesday and Thursday nights in bowling leagues, and that no longer happens anymore. People used to gather on front porches, but once air conditioning came around, people stopped hanging out in front porches talking to each other. They started going to their TV rooms, and all these types of things are causing people to spend less connection. And certainly churches and places of worship have declined, and there's all these things are pulling people apart. And unfortunately, one of my concerns is like the workplace was a place of connection and development, to your point, and practicing leadership. And it is worrying to me that, hey, now we're all diffuse, and here's just another way that we're disconnected from each other. And again, I think at least in business context, there's a responsibility for leaders to really think about what are they doing and how are they showing up, not for connecting for themselves, but rather how do they allow for connection and networking to happen within and among their team? How do they model it? How do they set up those conditions for it? And it's essential for the future.
Well, I think you just hit the nail on the head, is that people follow the cues of leadership. So if they are sort of anti cross-pollination in an organization, if they're like, stay in your lane, if those are the messages, then you're going to struggle with that mentality. But to your point, if they're modeling it, if they're showing how they're meeting with other leaders across departments and then showing the value that they're getting from it and explaining to people why it's good for them to do the same things, that's more powerful than just forcing one-on-one meetings.
Completely. Well, as any parent knows, it's not what you say. It's your kids are watching what you're doing, and we all learn that. Back to your point, we're social animals. We take cues from from others on what's acceptable, and those concerning thing again for all these new people entering the workforce. They've been through a very difficult past few years. They're entering these workforces, going through all this change and turmoil. It's a time for leadership, and it's a time you certainly bring people in and get people in person as much as possible. but there's a whole host of things that we need to show up as leaders for this next generation of workers, for the health of our economy and our country and our culture, that we need to step up to the bar as leaders and create those conditions for people to thrive in.
That's good. I love it. So one last question I have for you, Sean. What advice would you give somebody that considers themselves more of an introvert? Now, they have interest in maybe doing some of the things we talked about, maybe meeting some of the people in a different department or these other things, but they're nervous and they're worried that they're going to be bothering these other people. Why would they want to talk to me? You know, I'm going to tell myself all sorts of different stories. And also I'm an introvert, so maybe I'm typically kind of shy. And what advice would you give that person, Sean, to maybe start to break out of that shell and see the value in those connections?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a few things, and I'm kind of a middle of the road introvert extrovert. I show up big in personality, that I gotta hunker down myself, but live among a number of introverts, and it's tough for me to give advice and say, hey, how do you overcome that? Because I think we all have different, maybe challenges in doing those types of things. What I do hear over and over again, though, is, it was really great. I did talk to them. Like afterwards, you'll hear from, and again, as someone who's been a leader of people who've struggled with this, you'll hear, oh yeah, I'm really glad I did do that, or I had that conversation, or I put the effort out. So at least having the end in mind and knowing that almost always it works out for the better. I hope that's a little bit of a motivator. There was some movie line someplace I remember that all it takes is like 10 seconds of courage to do something. Like if you can just do something for 10 seconds and it cracks the door open and let good things happen. But I know it can be a struggle. One other thing though is that, everyone is an expert in some topic, or they're very curious about some topic, and they can do things to signal to others to say, hey, I know this really well, or they can signal that I'm really interested learning this without having to initiate it. They can make themselves available, and then they can let those extroverts come and find them.
I think that's fantastic advice.
A different way to think about it.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic advice. Is definitely signaling to people the things that you're interested in to make it more of a two-way street too. So people are coming to you as much as you might try to go out to them. And I think it's interesting. The guy who started DemoHop considers himself a middle of the road. You would think that a person that would start this type of software would be much more extroverted in general. And I think that goes to show is that in my mind, honestly, I've never met an extrovert, I was textbook one in my life. Yeah. I've met some people who are very gregarious, but then they all need downtime. They all need time in a sauna or sit in a dark room and read a book. At some point to recharge. And so I think just because you might be around people that might seem a bit loud and gregarious, don't think that they also don't have their challenges with meeting new people and approaching people as well. So don't, as my dad always told me, don't say no for other people.
Yeah. Good advice. Good advice.
Right. All right. So if I want to get in touch with you and learn more about DemoHop and the opportunities there, where's a great place to find out more info or connect with you, Sean?
Yeah, obviously DemoHop.com for those that are interested in the product and trying that out. You can also find me on LinkedIn pretty easily, Sean Murphy and DemoHop or Target or any of those kind of past workplaces. And I make myself available over email. So Sean, SEAN, the Irish way, Sean at DemoHop.com is a really easy way to grab me.
That's great. Well, Sean, thank you so much for taking the time today. I appreciate you sharing with the audience all these things. I think the software is fantastic. So I strongly suggest anybody who's interested, go and check it out because it's really fantastic. It's really well done. So congratulations on all your success.
Thank you so much. And I also have to say, I just admire your perseverance and the community you've created with this podcast. It's something that I often think, oh, I should do that. And then I look at people like you, I was like, I don't have just the constitution that you have to keep that going. It's so impressive.
Oh, you're too kind. You're too kind. Well, thanks again, Sean. We'll talk again soon, okay?
Thank you.
We appreciate you taking the time to listen to this episode of Schmidt List. The stories shared by our guests are genuinely inspiring and offer insightful knowledge. It's important to remember that success doesn't happen overnight and requires collaboration, learning, and perseverance. If you want to broaden your professional connections, check out Kurt's book, The Little Book of Networking: How to Build Your Career One Conversation at a Time, on Amazon. Please stay connected with all things Schmidt List on social media, leave a review for the podcast, and join our community of like-minded entrepreneurs. Thank you for being part of Schmidt List. Keep innovating, collaborating, and chasing your entrepreneurial dreams.